All right, let's dive right into a question that honestly challenges the very foundation of what most of us think the United States is. Is it a country? The constitutional republic we all learned about in school. Or could it be something else entirely? We're about to explore a theory that says, yeah, it is. So we're going to dig into a framework laid out in a whole series of papers by Anna von Reitz. Now, according to these documents, the reality of American government is, well, it's a hidden system, one that's supposedly been in place for over 150 years. What we're going to do in this explainer is walk through the core arguments of that worldview, using the sources themselves to build what you see.
Okay, so the first thing you really got to wrap your head around is the central idea of this whole worldview, this tale of two Americas. The sources argue there isn't just one, but two totally distinct entities operating under a very, very similar name.
And they lay this duality out pretty clearly. On one side, you've got the United States of America Major. This is described as the original deal, the Union of States, a republic on the land. But then there's the United States of America Minor, which is presented as something totally different, a corporate, legislative democracy that operates on the sea. And these two entities, the theory claims, have two completely different types of citizens.
This is where this idea of jurisdiction becomes absolutely crucial. The land jurisdiction, according to these papers, is the domain of American state citizens. It's where their unalienable rights exist under common law. But the sea jurisdiction? That's the world of international commerce, of maritime and admiralty law. And this is supposedly where the corporate United States and its U.S. citizens operate.
So the big question is, how in the world could this have happened? Well, the sources point to a very specific and what they call a secret history to explain how this whole corporate structure supposedly came to be.
At its heart, the argument is basically a swap, a bait and switch. The idea is that a series of governmental services corporations, privately owned, for profit, slowly but surely took the place of the original republic, all while keeping up the appearance of being the real thing. The story points to a few key moments. It all starts, they say, with the Act of 1871, which allegedly created a municipal corporation for D.C. Then you jump to 1913 and the Federal Reserve Act. The narrative really hits a critical point in 1933, the bankruptcy of the United States of America, Inc. It's right here, the sources argue, that citizens were unknowingly pledged as collateral, as surety, for the national corporate debt. And finally, the settlement of that bankruptcy around 2013 is said to have kicked off the next phase of this whole corporate system.
And a quote from the source material really puts the gravity of the claim in stark terms. The assertion is that this entire corporate structure, built on what they call semantic deceit, is just a massive breach of trust against the American people.
But you're probably thinking, how could a system this massive operate without people knowing? Well, the sources point to a very clever mechanism of control called personage. And believe it or not, it all comes down to your name. Let's break this down because it's a little tricky. The papers make this really sharp legal distinction. Living, breathing people. We have an appellation. That's what you're called. A name, on the other hand, is something that belongs to a thing, like a ship, or a corporation, or a trust. So personage is the alleged practice of creating these corporate things, these legal fictions or straw men, using your personal appellation.
And this is where the theory gets incredibly specific. Tiny changes in capitalization are said to create completely different legal entities. The all lowercase version, that's the living man. But capitalize the first letters, and suddenly John Quincy Adams becomes a foreign situs trust, basically an offshore legal entity. Go to all caps, and John Quincy Adams is claimed to be an estate trust based in Puerto Rico. And just adding that middle initial, that creates what's called a transmitting utility. Think of it as a shell company for routing transactions.
So here's the kicker. When a government agency or a court sends you a bill or a summons, and it's addressed to the all caps version of your name, according to this theory, they're not actually addressing you, the living person. They're addressing that corporate legal fiction, the estate trust. And that legal fiction is what's subject to their statutory laws and corporate debts.
Okay, this all seems really abstract, I know. But the sources argue it has profound, real-world consequences for every single one of us. So what's the actual difference between being seen as a living person versus one of these legal fictions? Well, the alleged differences are pretty dramatic. An American state citizen is considered a sovereign being on the land, someone who possesses unalienable rights, who is the employer of the government. But a U.S. citizen, in this framework, is a legal fiction, an indentured servant or a surety for the corporation who only has equal civil rights, things that can be granted or, more importantly, taken away by Congress. So, after laying out this incredibly complex problem, the sources don't just leave you hanging. They also propose a very specific legal path for people to, as they put it, correct their status and get out of this corporate system.
The path they propose involves 3 key steps. First, you have to formally declare your status and object to being treated as a corporate U.S. citizen. Second, you file what's called a UCC-1 financing statement. Now, this is a real-world commercial document, but here it's used to declare yourself as the main creditor over all those legal fictions created in your name. And third, you have to assert that you operate on the land jurisdiction under common law.
One of the key documents mentioned in the sources is something called an irrevocable will. It's presented as a kind of mass UCC filing, a single document that's meant to reclaim the standing and property for all American state citizens by basically lodging a huge counterclaim against those bankrupt corporations.
And this quote really captures the spirit of the proposed solution. It's a call to action. It frames this whole thing not as just some passive theory, but as an active process of reclaiming what the sources describe as your own inherent sovereign authority.
Okay, phew, we have covered a ton of ground here. 2 Americas, a corporate takeover, the whole name deception thing, and a proposed fix. So let's try and boil this really complex worldview down into its most essential points.
So here they are, the 5 key pillars presented in the Anna von Reitz papers. 1. The United States you interact with is actually a corporation. 2. This corporation took over from the original republic through a series of historical acts. 3. Your name was used to create legal fictions to make you liable for debt. 4. This whole setup treats you as a U.S. citizen in a foreign maritime jurisdiction. And 5. There's a specific process you can follow to reclaim your original standing on the land.
Ultimately, what this whole body of work is saying is that this isn't just some intellectual exercise or conspiracy theory. It's presented as the actual hidden legal and financial operating system that defines, and they would argue, limits your life, your property, and your freedom every single day.
And that really brings us to the final big question. This framework, it forces you to re-examine everything, from your birth certificate and your driver's license to your tax forms. It challenges us all to ask, when we see our name printed on a document, what and who is truly being represented? A living, breathing person or a corporate entity?